Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to talk about culture shock and reverse culture shock. So if you have ever spent an extended period of time outside of your home country, chances are you experienced some culture shock while trying to acclimate to your new surroundings. And for me, this happened recently during a trip I had to Costa Rica. So there were a few things about my new environment I had to get used to. I did get used to them during the trip. What I was not prepared for, though, was how much I would be transformed by the experience, so much so that I experienced reverse culture shock when I returned back to the U.S. So a little bit about my trip. I spent some time in Costa Rica. I was living like a local, staying in an apartment in Heredia City while also taking Spanish lessons at a language institute. And during this time, I noticed some distinct differences in the culture that I had to get used to. So the first one was that Costa Rica does not really have a hustle culture. At least I did not experience it at all. Yes, people have places to go, things to do, and people to see, but they are much more chill and tranquil in the way they go about, getting from place to place. So I was in a city, I was walking to and from, the school every day. And I never felt like, as I'm seeing people commuting to and from work, I never felt like anyone was going to try to push me out of the way on the sidewalk so they could try to cross the light or anything like that. So that was definitely different. I will say though that when it comes to the reverse side of the culture shock, so for me, after, commuting to and from my language institute and getting kind of used to the normal ebb and flow of things in Costa Rica, on the day that I was supposed to return, when I was going to the airport, my anxiety level that morning when I woke up already started all the way up here, right? I literally went from here to here just in the overnight. Knowing that I was going to have to take an international flight and I wanted to make sure I was on time. So I'm immediately thinking about the traffic and the weather and my Uber and all these things that I really just wasn't that concerned with during my trip. So I feel like, in the US, we tend to rely on our phones for a lot of things, and we're constantly being bombarded with notifications, which I did not really get while I was in Costa Rica. Not to say that you can't get that on your phone. It just wasn't something that I was hyper focused and aware of. I wasn't constantly checking the news and the weather and the traffic and all these things. I kind of would just look at it in the morning before I leave. Do I need an umbrella? Okay, I'm on my way about my day. So that was one thing that I noticed that was definitely a culture shock, and then a reverse culture shock on the back end after I realized how much I had acclimated to the Costa Rica environment. So the next thing, number 2, is customer service and the tipping culture, and they kind of go hand in hand. So one of the things I really enjoyed during my time in Costa Rica was the level of customer service that I received in restaurants. I felt like in general, the wait staff was not only accommodating, but they also were very relaxed. A meal could be an experience. I went out to lunch with some of my friends that I had met on the trip, and we had a 2.5 hours, and the server, the whole time was just very, I keep using the word accommodating, but that's what he was. He was asking, do you need anything else? Can I get you some more water? Blah, blah, blah. But he was not pushy. You probably sat down in a restaurant before in the States and you've had good customer service, but literally the second that your food comes to the table, the server is I'm just going to put this check right here. Just let me know when you're ready and I'll go ahead and take that for you. No rush. And they're telling you no rush, but let's be real. They're probably also thinking I would love to hurry up and turn around this table so I can make some more money. Well, that's not really a thing in Costa Rica. And I think part of that is because, number one, people tend to just be more leisurely and more conversational when they're going out to eat, but also because in my experience, the tips were included. In fact, most of the restaurants that I went to, the tip it showed on the menu, how much percentage the tip was going to be. So that's not something that you had to calculate. And I guess the server knows, for the most part, they're going to make whatever they're going to make. Maybe they're not as stressed about, turning and burning tables in order to make more money. So that was something that was interesting. And then back to the tipping culture, really you don't see a lot of upselling on tips. That's the US, the second I got back to the airport, it was tip for this, tip for that. And that's not really something that you see in Costa Rica. So that was a welcome change while I was there, but a shock to the system when I got back to the US, especially when I took my Uber. That's another thing because Ubers in Costa Rica are fairly inexpensive. Most of the rides that I had while I was there were somewhere between for the most part, like $10 or less. And when I took my Uber from the airport back to my house when I got back to the US, it was like $100. Part of that is because of the time of day, and I think there was other events going on because there was a lot of traffic for a Saturday evening. So I think I got hung up in that surge pricing, but literally it was like $100. And then still afterward, like in general, it said, would you like to tip your driver? And I'm like, wow, really? On top of this, also a tip? Yeah, so that's not really something that I experienced while I was in Costa Rica. So that was definitely a reverse culture shock to the system when I got back to the US. And so I guess this one kind of piggybacks off the last one when I talked about kind of the leisurely lunch and people conversing, while they're out and about. I feel like in general, people in Costa Rica seem to value relationships. Not to say that they don't value relationships here in the US, because that certainly is the case. But I feel like in general, people take the time to get to know each other. I found that the locals were very friendly. Again, I was there learning Spanish, so at the time I knew some. When I first arrived, I knew some, but I was far from proficient. And asking people for directions, they were very kind and very accommodating. In whether they spoke English or not, they did their best to try to provide directions or, to help in whatever way you needed, whether you're in the store or whatever. And I found that at the Language Institute, the people that worked there, they were so congenial. They were so nice. They really took a time and an interest in getting to know us as students. And it's very transient. So there are students that might be there taking lessons for just a week, or they may be there as much as 6 months or a year. But they took the time to really see how are you doing? How are your lessons? They were just very kind. And then also, since I spent quite a bit of time there, I had an opportunity to kind of observe the staff and how they interacted with each other. And you could see that they really saw each other not just as coworkers, but really as friends and maybe even like a family. It was really kind of like a family atmosphere. And I know here in the US, a lot of times we'll say my work family or my work wife or my work husband. And sometimes that really is, a strong bond and a lasting relationship. I know I have some friends that I met at work that, years ago that I'm still friends with today. But come on, we've all had these places we've worked, these jobs where you're like, oh yeah, my work family, and they're your family until Friday at 5 or 6 o'clock, and then you're trying to not think about them again until Monday. So that is not really something that I saw in Costa Rica. And I would say just people value relationships in general. Like I mentioned, when we were out to eat, one of my friends at the table, after about 2 hours in the restaurant, she was like, wow, I just realized that we've been here this whole time and none of us have looked at our phones. And I thought about it and I was like, yeah, you're right. We've just been sitting here engaged in conversation. And now that I've been back in the US and had some time to reflect on my time in Costa Rica, I will say that for the most part, when I was out and about, in restaurants, I did not see people looking at their phones. Now, this may be different in some of the touristy areas or some of the more expat communities, but in the Central Valley or in and around Heredia City surrounding it, I saw people sitting at the table, fully engaged in conversation, enjoying each other's company for the duration of their meal, which is kind of the opposite of what I see a lot, unfortunately, here in the US right now, where, you might see a family of 4 out to dinner and they're all chit-chatting and they order their food, and the second the server takes the order, they're all back in their devices. Which, it's really honestly kind of sad because, your phone's going to be there, but you don't know how much time you have left with your loved ones. You should cherish every moment. So I feel like in general in Costa Rica, people really tend to value relationships, and they really take the time, when they have people with them, they really take the time to be in the moment and enjoy each other's company. Which brings me to the last piece of my culture shock and reverse culture shock. So if you've ever been to Costa Rica, the motto of the country is Pura Vida, or pure life. And it really is a lifestyle, and they truly do live it. So it really is just that kind of relaxed and laid back vibe. it's just super chill, and it is a part literally of everything that they do. If you ever have the opportunity to go to Costa Rica, you will see Pura Vida on all kinds of things. They even have a beer they named after Pura Vida. So it really truly is who they are. And you know, for me, like I mentioned earlier on in this video, when I was preparing to go back home on that last day before I went to the airport, it's like I fell asleep Pura Vida and woke up super anxious. It was like it just left me the second I thought about, you know, kind of returning back to the States. And so, and there are definitely some distinct differences in Costa Rica and the United States. And so if you're thinking about perhaps visiting Costa Rica, doing some slow travel, maybe relocating there, if you're looking for a tranquil lifestyle, Costa Rica could definitely potentially be a place for you. Of course, though, every place has some pros and some cons, so it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's definitely some things that you might not like so much about Costa Rica, which I'd be happy to share in another video. If you're interested, let me know in the comments. Also, if you've ever experienced culture shock in Costa Rica or some other country that you visited, as well as reverse culture shock when you came back to the U.S., please feel free to share your comments in the comment section. Also, if you haven't already done so, I appreciate it if you could like this channel and, you know, like and subscribe. That would really be a big favor for me. And again, as always, thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. See you next time.